SAT reading questions can sometimes feel like navigating a maze. And sure, you might make it out eventually, but how much time are you going to waste in the process? In this video, I'm going to give you 4 tricks that are guaranteed to get you through these questions as fast as possible. So if you were going into a maze and I gave you an option of either taking a map or not, would you take the map? Of course you would. So then why are so many students going into these passages without a plan? Don't start working on these problems until you've read the question first. This acts as a map telling you exactly what you're looking for. And at the end of the day, it's going to be one of 2 things, either big picture information or detail-oriented information. If we're looking at main ideas, they tend to live either in the beginning or end of paragraphs. This question is a great example of when you would find the main idea at the beginning of the passage. So the very first sentence we get, to dye wool, this person uses plants and vegetables from Arizona where she lives. And this ends up being our main idea. One of the keys that tells us this is we have 4 examples. So now we're just going to get examples of her using plants and vegetables. And then at the end, we get a little bit more information saying that to intensify the appearance of certain colors, she also uses clay. So we've got plants, we've got vegetables, we've got clay. And I would say that we do get what we need just from that first sentence, but there's a little bit of support at the end as well. So then just from that, if we go through our answer choices, we can get rid of A. And then B says she draws on local resources. Plants and vegetables, local resources, clay, local resources. Just like that, we know our answer is choice B. And by the way, definitely pause the video and try these example questions on your own first if you want to get a little bit more practice in. All of these questions are going to be non-test questions from the College Board question bank. That is to say, they don't show up on the College Board practice exams. They're just practice questions available to everyone. So for this question, yeah, I'll encourage you, go ahead and pause the video and try it on your own first, just to get some extra practice in. But this is a great example of when the main idea shows up at the end of the passage primarily. Now, to be clear, I still recommend at least skimming through the entire passage for any main idea question. So let's kind of do that. As we start skimming through, it starts off saying that this guy, Juan Pablo, wrote some stuff and is often considered a forerunner of some sort of movement in Latin America or movements in Latin America. So it starts off focusing on this Juan Pablo guy. But then we get a but, so we know that this is going to be contrasted. This guy's role in history would have remained insignificant if it were not for Miranda. So in the second sentence, we realize the focus here is actually going to be on Miranda. Then we get that Miranda was the one who handed the unpublished letter. And then it ends, the last sentence here basically not only helped circulate the letter, but edited, added footnotes. And finally, we get position Miranda as a central figure in the text's creation. So I think just from browsing and then seeing that last sentence, Miranda as a central figure in the text creation, we can kind of steal that as our main idea. So then if we go through here, we get the authorship is disputed. No, it doesn't really talk about that. It does say that the other guy is often considered a forerunner, but it doesn't say that anybody is contesting Miranda's influence per se. B, the majority of the most eloquently stated arguments in this letter were written by Miranda. Well, first of all, I'm pretty sure that's not true. It says Miranda was doing more with editing, footnotes, and also it's not the main idea that we circled here. Even if it were true, it'd be too specific, right? C, Miranda played a crucial role in influencing the content and distribution of the letter. Yeah, that totally matches with Miranda being a central figure. And then D, the letter persuaded many people to pursue national independence. We don't know, we don't care. So, yep, choice C. So there you have a couple of examples of the main idea showing up either at the beginning or the end of the text, and sometimes maybe a little mixture of both. Now, sometimes you'll also come across questions about structure, and this is basically just breaking the text down into chunks of information, sections, if you will. And I'll show you what I mean. I'll demonstrate on this problem. If you want to try it on your own first, pause the video. But we get this first sentence. According to this economist, the Eurocentric concepts that informed early 20th century social scientific methods. And it gives us a for example, which I'm going to totally ignore because that is detail that I don't care about, had little relevance for India. Okay, so that first sentence, I would say, is the first chunk of this paragraph. So for one, I'll say econ for economist says Euro methods not relevant. And I know it's for India. If you want to add India, you can. In truth, I probably wouldn't even write this down. I'd probably just be thinking this in my head. So first chunk of the text, for me, that's kind of what's happening, right? So you want to put things into your own words. We'll talk about that more in a second here. Then we get making the social sciences more responsive to India's needs. This same guy argued required constructing analytical categories. Okay, so I don't care about the details here. Because what I'm getting is he's now offering a solution to this problem, right? And maybe I'll specify, I'll say this is a problem according to this guy. Can't write the word problem. What are you going to do? So this is a problem. And then in the second part, he offers a solution to that problem. And then if I keep reading, he thus proposed, So I would say this is still offering a solution. It's a little bit more specific, but I think it still falls into the category of offering a solution. So my big two parts that I'm seeing here are this guy says there's a problem, then this guy offers a solution. All right. So let's go and start eliminating answers. And if you couldn't already tell, I highly recommend using an elimination strategy for pretty much every reading question. So keep that in mind. And the cool thing is these answers have to be in the correct order. So we should be able to eliminate some of these at least just by reading the first part if it doesn't match there being a problem proposed by this guy, Mukherjee, right? So the text recounts his early training. No, that's not what it does. It has him propose a problem, so we get rid of A. The text mentions some of his theories. No, not theories. Again, he's pointing out a problem. The text presents his critique. That's exactly what I said. He's saying there's a problem. So we could keep that one. And then if we wanted to see if we could quickly eliminate D, the text explains a theory. Well, yeah, we could actually get rid of D too. So without even reading the entire answer, we know that C is correct. But just to be careful, if you weren't 100% sure, you could double check. So we have, and then provides an example of his attempts to address issues. Offering a solution is the same thing as addressing issues, so we're good to go. So that's how you could go about finding big picture ideas. Now, when it comes to finding detail-based information, I actually think it's a lot more straightforward. You just want to skim the passage looking for keywords either from the question stem or synonyms of those words that you're looking at from the question stem. So on this one, for example, I know it's a detail question because it says specifically, why does Bill regularly ask about seafaring men? And it even puts seafaring men in quotations, right? So rather than start reading through the whole thing like I would normally do for a main idea question, I'm just going to pass over this with my eyes looking for seafaring men. And pretty quickly I see seafaring men right here, right? So now I'm focusing on this part. It also says he would ask. So he would ask if any seafaring men had gone by. Next sentence, at first we thought it was the want of company. So they're saying at first we thought he wanted company, but we began to see he was desirous to avoid them. Okay, so then that should basically be my answer, right? He was asking about them because he was desirous to avoid them. And I'm going to change this up and just put it in my own words real quick and say he didn't want to run into them. So going through the answers, choice A, he's hoping to find a friend. No. He's trying to secure a job. No. He isn't as sure. No. He doesn't want to encounter any other sailor unexpectedly. Yes, he does not want to encounter them. He does not want to run into them. Our answer is choice D. Now, I would also argue that these textual command of evidence questions are detail-oriented because you're either going to be supporting or weakening some sort of a hypothesis or conclusion or assertion. Like here we see which would most directly support the conclusion. And I think these are even easier than your details questions because We usually find the conclusion or the hypothesis in the very last sentence, just like we do here. Concluded, wet and warm scenario is likely correct. And then from here, for these types of questions, if that's enough to go off of, I would start getting rid of answers. Just scanning the answers, I don't actually see wet and warm anywhere. So I need to know what it is before I can start eliminating answers that have to do with it. So now I'm skimming from the beginning, looking for wet and warm, the so-called wet and warm scenario. Boom. We have an or after the dash there, so that's going to be a different option. So before the dash, we should get more information about the wet and warm scenario. It says it is a prolonged phase of warm, wet conditions. Cool. All right. So prolonged phase of warm, wet conditions. If I were to reword this, maybe I would say something along the lines of long period of warm and wet. All right, so we're looking for an answer that supports that. We're going to get rid of answers that do not support that. And it does say which finding about the basin. So all these answers will relate to some basin. Its dimensions and shape indicate it is unlikely to have formed as the result of an asteroid or comet impact. That has nothing to do with warm or wet, so A is out. It has features suggesting that it once held an ocean that underwent gradual sea level changes over an extended time. Well, if there was a long period of warm and wet, I could see it would make sense that you would have this big body of water that was going through changes, kind of like our own. So that totally makes sense. I would keep B. C, its physical characteristics are most consistent with it having formed as a result of a massive but short-lived influx of liquid water. So the massive seems fine, but short-lived does not match up with a long period. So C is out. D, it's surrounded by channels that could have been formed either by running water or by flowing lava. That doesn't help at all. I don't know if you could even consider lava as wet. I know it's flowing, but wet is for water, right? So yeah, D wouldn't work either. And then boom, we got our answer. Choice B. So we're going through the maze. We have our map now, which is great. But as we explore the maze, would it be better to explore every nook and cranny? Or would it be better to just follow the routes that seem to lead us closer to our destination? My next tip is to ignore the fluff. Now, I realize that fluff is not a very specific term, so let me specify what some fluff looks like. A lot of the time, we could ignore non-essential information that is sandwiched between either two commas, a set of parentheses, or two dashes. So here, for example, we see there's a couple dashes here. So this is what would be considered like non-essential information. And we can also, a lot of the time, ignore prepositional phrases. So if I were reading through this, I would get many histories of the Black Power movement. So the Black Power movement seems pretty important, even though this is technically a prepositional phrase. Without it, I wouldn't know like which intellectual histories. But then when it starts to go into the actual dates don't matter if we're talking about main idea, so I would ignore that. Again, we had a prepositional phrase starting with of. Rely heavily on essays and other explicitly ideological works as primary resources, a tendency that can over-represent the perspectives of a small number of thinkers, most of whom were male. This historian, and speaking of fluff, like I don't care about the names per se. If I just think of it as, this historian or maybe just like Ashley or whatever, that helps me to focus more on main ideas. I would consider those names to be fluff in a sense. Has shown that expanding the array of primary sources to encompass more types of print material, so again, we don't need the detail of which types of print material, leads to a much better understanding of the movement and the adjective and adjective roles that Black women played. So then I know I'm focusing on Black women's role, expanding primary sources, and that's basically the main idea, right? So going back to some of my first tips, we do see that the main idea shows up in the last sentence here. And to rephrase it, I'd probably say something like, Ashley shows more sources, helps include Black women. Cool. Choice A. Farmers' methods, and I know Farmers Ashley. Farmers' methods and research have enriched the historical understanding of the Black Power movement and Black women's contributions to it. Black women's contributions, Farmers' methods were looking pretty good there, so I'd keep that one. Before her research, they had ignored stuff. No, that is not the main idea. It was kind of mentioned at the beginning, but that's not what we're focusing on. C, other historians have criticized her use. I don't think it mentioned that at all. The figures of the movement whom historians tend to cite would have agreed with Farmer's conclusions. We don't know that, and that doesn't matter. So yeah, choice A is our answer for this one. So definitely be on the lookout for prepositional phrases and for non-essential information. Those might be like a little bit more obvious as things that can be ignored, especially if you're looking for main ideas. But I would rather you just get into the habit of ignoring things that you know are not your target. So if it's the main idea, like probably a lot of stuff in the beginning and the end of text you do want to pay attention to, and you could probably ignore a lot of the middle. But for a question like this one, where we know we're looking for overall structure of the text, so basically, like I was saying, you want to break it down into its parts, just let's go through. And to be clear, we're obviously not really going to be crossing stuff off as we read, as we're taking the exam. But I want you to see kind of what's going on in my mind, what words I'm paying attention to versus what words I'm glossing over. So in this book, this person, Mitchell, advanced the controversial idea, that books for very young children should imitate how they use language, since I don't care about since, because I already have that the first part of this is M. I wouldn't even call her Mitchell. I'll call her M. M says kid books should have kid language, something like that, right? I don't care about the why. The most enduring example. Okay, so example of this. Everything after that I'm ignoring. Everything. Scholars note the emphasis. Okay, this seems to be speaking more to that example. So you can see how much fluff I'm eliminating here by saying the first thing that happens is M says the book should have kid language. The second thing that happens is we get an example of that. Why is it doing this to me? There we go. Example of that. Cool. So now I'm going to go through and eliminate. Choice A, outlines a debate. No, I'm looking for this one person saying kid book should have kid language. So that's not a debate. Summarizes an argument. Okay, I like that. About how children's literature should be evaluated. So there's an issue. It's not about how it should be evaluated. It's about the content of those books, how it should be written. So B doesn't work. C, the text lists the literary characteristics that are common. It does not list what's common. It says what this M person thinks should be the way they're written. So just by process of elimination, my answer is D. But again, if you're not feeling super confident, you could look at it. The text presents a philosophy, an argument, a philosophy about what material is suitable for children's literature. Yep, kids' book should have kid language. And then describes a book influenced by that philosophy. Gives an example of that. So totally matches. We are good to go. All right, so we've got our map. We're ignoring any obvious dead ends. But at the end of the day, it's still a maze. So we're going to need to make sure that we pay attention to any obvious markers. And on SAT reading questions, these markers tend to be transitions. So tip 3 is to get excited about transitions. Now you've already sort of seen this in some of the other examples, but let's take a look at this one. We always want to start with the question, as was mentioned in tip 1. So looking at the question, we know this is a detailed question, right? What can be concluded about specifically the diminishing popularity of portrait miniature? So that's what we're focusing on. So skimming through, looking for that detail, the diminishing popularity, word for word, shows up in sentence 2. So I'm going to read that. Diminishing popularity of the portrait miniature, which coincided with the rise of photography, seems to support this claim. Okay, so what is this claim? First sentence, assumption among historians is that the invention of photography displaced, okay, so photography displaced the portrait miniature. So I know that's the assumption, and then I see the word however, so I get very excited because this is telling me Even though the beginning of the paragraph was talking about how photography displaced the painted portrait, however, we're about to flip that on its head and really get to the important thing, which is that photography's impact may be overstated. All right. And honestly, may be overstated. Photography's impact may be overstated. I'm really going to focus on that. When it says what can be concluded about the diminished popularity, I'm going to say that it wasn't all about photography, something like that. So, choice A, factors other than the rise of photography may be more directly responsible for its decline. Yeah, it wasn't all about photography. I like that. I'm going to keep that. B, although they became less common than photographs, they were widely regarded as more artistic. Nope. C, the popularity likely persisted for longer. Nope. D, as demand decreased, portrait artists likely shifted their focus. Nope. So just like that, we've got choice A as our correct answer. And the crux, the thing that really showed us what we wanted to focus on was that however. So please do get excited about transitions because they're very exciting. I want to also point out that these are really helpful for words in context. In fact, I recommend looking for transitions to point you to what context is going to actually help you fill in the blank with a prediction. So words in context, we always know because it's going to tell us, most logical, precise word or phrase. And then from there, I recommend predicting your own answer, coming up with your own word or phrase to fill in the blank. So here we get this choreographer wants to give people the opportunity to blank her creative process. For example, I'm so excited because for example is telling me an example of whatever this is supposed to be. So I can kind of work backwards, right? Live performances of this thing featured videos of people across the states talking about their hair and audience members sharing pictures of their hairstyles. So that seems to be an example of people, audience members getting involved. So then I would say she wants to give people the opportunity to be a part of her creative process. That would be my anticipation, my prediction. Go through the answer choices. Not nervous, not completed, not delayed, involved in, a part of, yes, yes, and yes. Get excited about transitions. So at this point, we are pretty well off navigating this maze. But what if I told you we could extract ourselves from our body and float above the maze, viewing things from a top-down perspective? Putting the text into your own words gives you this new perspective that makes everything so much easier to understand. So my fourth tip is going to be to put things in your own words before you come up with a prediction. Putting things into your own words is a game changer, especially for more convoluted texts like sciencey texts. So I've got a sciencey text here, and this is actually an inference question. So for inference questions, I like to actually start with the very last sentence because it's going to usually tell me what I'm aiming for. I'm excited. There's a transition word. Indeed. What does indeed mean? So indeed is sort of expanding on whatever came before it. So I know that'll probably be helpful. Indeed, the two census reports reported similar counts of, similar counts of vertebrate, plant, and algal species, suggesting that blank. All right, and then going back, what is that indeed? Researchers' decision on such matters can be highly consequential. All right. Now I'm just kind of working backwards here because it says decisions on such matters. I want to know what those matters were. Sentence before that, another factor is that the variability of microorganisms is poorly understood compared to that of these other things, creating uncertainty about how to evaluate microorganisms. So uncertainty about microorganisms. Cool. I already want to write this in my own words because this seems to be the most important part of the text. And in my own words, I'm going to say uncertainty about micros compared to others. All right. I don't care about the specifics. It's just like the micros seem to be important because it's saying specifically that the micros had this uncertainty about them compared to all the others. And I don't need to list all the others per se because it looks like they're repeated. And yeah, I don't care. All right. And then just for context, let me actually read the beginning here. So these guys with Cole had a report of 17,000, which was nearly double this other report, a difference only partly attributable to the description of new invertebrate species in the interim. Okay, so let's also stick this into my own words. I'm going to say something along the lines of big diff in numbers, and it said only partly attributable to the description of new invertebrate species. So I remember invertebrate was one of the, basically not one of the micros. Big diff in numbers, not, or actually no, I'd say not just from non-micro. Okay. So anyway, with these two things written in my own words, I can finally get back to the crux of the matter, which is saying decisions can be highly consequential. The two censuses actually had similar counts of all these other things, suggesting that what? Suggesting that this uncertainty about the micros caused the difference, right? So I would maybe even just add that. Uncertainty about micros caused the big difference in numbers in these two censuses, all right? So that's what I'm looking for. Choice A, these guys reported much higher species than these other guys, largely due to inclusion of invertebrate. Nope, I'm looking for those micros, and I'm looking for an uncertainty about the micros. B, some differences in micros may have been treated as variations by these guys, but treated as distinct species by these other guys. Cool, yeah. That seems to point to an uncertainty, so I would keep B. These guys may have been less sensitive to the variation displayed within a typical species of micros than these other guys were. So that also mentions the micros. I'll keep that for now, and we can investigate the wording if we need to. D, the absence of clarity regarding how to differentiate among species of micros may have resulted from these guys underestimating the number of micros. Okay, so that one does mention the micros that I'm looking for, but rather than pointing to uncertainty, like it does, well, this is why it's tricky, I think. It says absence of clarity, which totally lines up with uncertainty, but it's saying that these guys underestimated, like they actually made a mistake. No, there's no indication that either of these teams were making mistakes. The big picture is that there's uncertainty and that scientists don't agree. So to call it a mistake or an underestimation is making a judgment. We don't want to make a judgment. We just want to say that, basically different scientists are going to view these things differently because there's uncertainty and there's not an agreed upon way to evaluate these micros. All right, so going back to B and C, let's look at the wording. I'll start with C here. These guys may have been less sensitive to the degree of variation. You know what? Now that I'm reading that again, that same language, less sensitive, that also seems to be a bit of a judgment call. To say that they were less sensitive is to say that they didn't notice as much as they should have compared to these other guys. So C is out. And just like that, I've got my answer, which is choice B. And then for one more example of how putting things into your own words is going to change your perspective, we got to look at some poetry because let's face it, a lot of the poetry on the SAT is just so convoluted, often old. In this case, nearly 100 years old, which is, it's hard to swallow. They tend to use language in ways that we don't use language anymore, even if it's just a fiction text. And then if it's poetry, you've got, poets using language in ways that we don't use them, even if they're modern poets. But then to make it even worse, they give us these old poems. So definitely a really great place to utilize this tactic of putting things into your own language and changing your perspective for the better. Let's take a look. Here, starting with the question, it's a detail question, right? What challenge do humans sometimes experience? Cool. So I'm focusing on humans and I'm focusing on challenge. So as I go through this, ignoring the fluff, what I really care about is the fact that it's old, because like I was saying, it's going to sort of indicate that the language is going to be used in a different way probably than I'm used to. And for a poem, sometimes the title of a poem adds to it. So I am going to pay attention to thoughts in a zoo. So now I know, I'm assuming somebody's at a zoo having thoughts. All right. So now I'm looking for humans or some sort of synonym of humans. I see man here. I see human here. So let's pay attention to this human part. Has in some, so it's connected here. So the lion with his lordly untamed heart has in some man his human counterpart. Some lofty soul, okay, so the lofty soul is the human, lofty soul in dreams and visions wrapped, but in the stifling flesh securely trapped. All right, I'm focusing here on trapped because it's saying, what challenge do humans sometimes experience? Being trapped is a negative thing. I would think of it as a challenge. So let's focus on this part and let's try to translate it into modern dad English. It's comparing a lion to a man. So untamed heart. Humans have wild heart. Some lofty soul in dreams and visions wrapped. So I know that lofty is sort of like reaching for the heavens, trying to go beyond what is here on earth. If you're not very well grounded, you have lofty dreams. And it does say like dreams and visions. And if you're wrapped in dreams and visions, so humans have a wild heart and big dreams, but in the stifling flesh securely trapped. So, but they are trapped in stifling flesh. What is that pointing to? That's pointing to reality, right? It's like, I have these big dreams and this wild heart, but I am just human on earth, right? Reality, something like that. So that would be how I would translate this one. This is the craziest caveman sentence.
Human have wild heart and big dreams, but I am just human on earth.
Maybe a sophisticated caveman. But yeah, caveman talk is not a bad language to aim for when you're trying to simplify stuff. So let's eliminate knowing that the challenge is basically like being human and having to deal with reality. Cannot effectively tame certain wild animals? No. Cannot focus on setting attainable goals because of a lack of motivation. Attainable goals, yes, maybe, but the lack of motivation, no, it doesn't mention motivation. They quickly become frustrated when faced with difficult tasks because of a lack of self-control? No. They have aspirations, big dreams, that cannot be fulfilled because of certain limitations, just human on earth. So, boom. Choice D is our answer. So at this point, we're pretty well equipped to navigate this hypothetical maze, but in reality, there's still one more problem. Every reading question is going to be a little bit different. You're going to approach an inferences question a lot different than you're going to approach a central ideas and details question, for example. This video right here is going to cover all of that nuance, every specific strategy that you're going to need for every type of reading question that shows up on the SAT.